You know, there's a point every gardener reaches where the pile of cardboard becomes a guilty secret. Boxes stacked behind the shed, delivery packaging shoved under a table, all just waiting for that one day when they'll be useful for mulching or composting. The problem is that cardboard attracts termites, roaches, and all kinds of pests if used the wrong way. Today, we're cutting through the nonsense. There's a composting method that eliminates termite risk altogether, breaks down faster than cardboard-heavy piles, and gives you richer compost, with less hassle. It's clean, efficient, and perfect for gardeners who don't want their compost turning into an insect hotel. Cardboard is basically a buffet. Termites don't show up because cardboard is in the compost. They show up because the cardboard stays intact long enough for them to find it, colonize it, and start feeding. When cardboard sits in chunks or layers, especially in warm climates, the cellulose stays dry in portions, giving termites a foothold. The problem isn't cardboard itself, it's how slowly it breaks down and how inconsistent its moisture levels are. The revolutionary method skips cardboard entirely and replaces it with a balanced carbon source that termites don't colonize as aggressively. Instead of cardboard, the carbon base becomes shredded dry leaves, chopped twigs, or sawdust mixed with grass clippings in the right ratio. What gardeners have discovered is that the moment you stop adding cardboard layers, the termite issue disappears, and the compost heats more consistently. When you run a ratio of 3 parts brown material to 1 part green, and stick to that consistently, the pile becomes biologically active enough to repel termite colonization. Termites avoid hot, moist, microbially charged environments, and this method keeps the pile in exactly that state. You know, a cold compost pile is an invitation, but a hot compost pile, that's a defense system. Compost that reaches and maintains temperatures above 60 degrees Celsius makes it extremely difficult for termite colonies to take hold, and when gardeners remove cardboard, the heat becomes more uniform because the material breaks down faster and doesn't create cold pockets inside the pile. So, here's a simple example that really proves the difference. A compost pile built with shredded leaves, grass clippings, and kitchen scraps in a 3-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio consistently hits 60 to 70 degrees Celsius within 3 to 6 days. On the other hand, a cardboard-heavy pile may sit at 35 degrees for weeks. That slow heat curve leaves gaps of cool, dry cellulose, exactly what termites love. When you ditch the cardboard and use finely broken down browns instead, the entire pile heats evenly. This is why, honestly, many experienced composters switch to leaf-dominant piles as soon as they notice termite activity. It resets the biology and makes the pile unattractive to pests. Alright, so, start with a base of coarse organic matter so airflow stays consistent. Gardeners often use a shallow layer of pruned twigs, small branches, or rough-cut straw. This keeps the pile from compacting. Once that layer is down, add 10 centimeters of shredded dry leaves. Not whole leaves, shredded. Whole leaves mat and hold moisture unevenly, but shredded leaves absorb water evenly and break down at a predictable rate. Alright, on top of that, go ahead and add a 1/3 volume of fresh green material. This could be grass clippings, fresh pruning waste, or even kitchen scraps. If you decide to use kitchen scraps, make sure to bury them thoroughly so they don't sit exposed. For example, you might use 3 buckets of shredded leaves to 1 bucket of grass clippings. And, blend the layers lightly instead of just stacking them solid. That blending is really what creates the temperature rise. Now, water the pile until it feels kind of like a wrung-out sponge. Then, just leave it for about 3 days. On the 3rd day, check the center of the pile. It should feel warm to the touch. If it's not heating up, add a little more green material. But if it's too wet and starts to smell sour, fold in more leaves. On the 7th day, it's time to turn the pile completely. This introduces oxygen and helps equalize the internal heat. Every time you turn the pile, you destroy any potential nesting space. Termites really thrive in still, compact, undisturbed material, but a pile that gets turned weekly never becomes termite territory. So, urban gardeners often lack access to large quantities of leaves, so they substitute sawdust. When using sawdust, the ratio changes slightly. You'll want 2 parts sawdust to 1 part green material, because sawdust carries more available carbon. For example, 2 buckets of clean, untreated sawdust mixed with 1 bucket of fresh grass will heat rapidly and produce a surprisingly rich compost after 6 to 8 weeks. Homesteaders with heavier pruning waste can chip the branches and use wood chips as the carbon source. Wood chips break down slower than leaves, but they do not attract termites when the pile stays hot. A mix of 3 buckets of wood chips to 1 bucket of manure creates an extremely active compost that remains termite-free because manure contains enough nitrogen to sustain high microbial heat. Gardeners in termite-heavy zones find that keeping the compost off bare soil adds an extra layer of security. Placing the compost on old bricks or a wire mesh prevents direct colony access. This doesn't interfere with the microbial activity but stops subterranean termites from tunneling upward. Alright, so here's the thing. Cardboard contains inks, glues, and chemicals, depending on where it came from. While it's generally safe, it's not exactly the most efficient carbon source, and it can slow down the pile quite a bit. When you take cardboard out of the equation, the compost finishes up faster, smells cleaner, and ends up with a finer texture. Plants, they just seem to respond better to compost with balanced carbon breakdown, because, well, the nutrients become available more evenly. Gardeners often notice that soil amended with this type of compost retains moisture without becoming heavy or clumpy. Tomato growers in particular report stronger root development, and those working with container gardening say the compost remains airy for a longer time. All these benefits come from consistent microbial activity, something that cardboard just struggles to support. So, stop wasting cardboard, stop inviting termites, and start building compost that actually performs. This method is simple, clean, and proven by gardeners who care about results, not trends. If you found this guide useful, make sure you subscribe to Garden Guru and share this with another gardener who needs a compost upgrade.